I can probably walk on paths because we know each other from the 1980s. So yeah, so so you can think of me as a replica in another form. He changed his dress. Um, Also, Kumar thinks I'm a joker in the pack. I can be fit in anywhere. But actually, you know, he actually cajoled me to come and spend 4 days with you because I was in the village and I had no real intention of coming to Delhi now. And I was thinking, what will I say? That's always. Because like I told you yesterday, I can't repeat what I've said before. There has to be something that I take back. So my this thing was, what will I say? And how will I say it? What's something new? What is the value add for me? And like yesterday, I was trying to make you think along with me. Today, I'll tell you how I added value for myself, irrespective of whether I added any value to you. So my trip here, I'm 400 kilometers from Delhi. I drove down one whole day. I'll drive back again, perhaps in the coming weekend or so thereabouts. So what's my takeaway? My takeaway. So this becomes an opportunity, and the lesson I can share from yesterday's politics of thinking or practice of thinking. After I listened to quite a few of the talks by others, like I tried to connect what others were saying with what I was trying to say. The dots you remember, how to connect the dots. So I was thinking last night, what additional dots can I add? So I virtually redid half my slides because I was rethinking that how will I present. And so one way of presenting was, I had originally thought today's talk on law as something quite different from what I said yesterday. But then last night, while thinking about it, it struck me that I shouldn't do that. I should put into practice what I said about connecting the dots. And I took it on myself to figure out how I connect the dots in the hope that you will get a sense of how to connect the dots in your own sphere, in your own life on a day-to-day basis. So the first change I did was, how many of you remember the Assam video yesterday? You remember? Yeah. So what's the lesson? Yesterday I had, John, there was a video, you can share the links, yeah, that I showed yesterday. I don't want to show it again. And I kept saying yesterday that I was really struck by that video, not because of what she was doing, but because of how she was doing it. So this is some of my takeaways. I don't know how to do what Chris does, one bullet point at a time. So I had to put my whole script down because I couldn't break my head on that. But so you are getting an advanced view of what I connected, because this was not my connection. That video was exclusively for yesterday. I hadn't thought of making the connection. But last night I began to think that there is a connection. And that's the first lesson. It's in our imagination to connect. Whole creativity, ingenuity, all of that is our capacity to imagine and connect. I'm not boasting. I am amazed that how much we waste ourselves because we are stuck in the rigidities of our frame, including those of us who believe in the ideas of liberty. That rigidity of the frames binds us or chains us down, our imagination. So what I thought was, which I didn't, because yesterday it was a bit more confusing for me too, because I was trying to think as a demonstration of thinking with you. What I thought was that, forget the thinking part, the other part that is related to today. Yesterday there was no mention of law, right? Neither did I mention it, except perhaps in the passing that when the video had no mention of the law, right? And I don't think any slide of mine yesterday had any mention of law. So what's the connect between what she was doing in a village or a couple of villages in Assam with completely people on the grassroots and law? Let's see if you can think through, because all of you spend 10, 15 minutes looking at that video, hopefully. Because I really mean it. Because again, it's a way to connect the dots. I connected it last night, I hadn't before. I want you to think, now that I've put my slide up, how would you connect with because it's virtually here. I'm not crazy, I couldn't do the bullet by bullet thing. How do you connect the dot? What was it that she did that can make us think of the law? Because that's what we are going to speak about. Yeah, please.
In a way, for me, she was an outlaw because she didn't immediately go to the law for a solution, but she tried looking for that solution within the community that had nothing to do with the law.
Yeah. Two things of what you said. One is she worked outside the law. So one could look at it, if her activity was anything to do with, say, if we thought of it as a crime, so it would be an outlaw, right? But what she did, we wouldn't normally think of it as a crime, right? I mean, she didn't violate or beat up or do anything that would be considered criminal. But she she didn't even bother about looking at the law and the institution. She tried to do it on her own at whatever level she could. Then the question is, what is law? Because you have already indicated a very critical point, which is the first thing I think you should keep in mind, our bottleneck. What is rule of law? Because after all, for people like us in this room, or many of us, perhaps, rule of law is a fundamental tenet of liberty, right, John? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. I grew up with that when I was your age. That was one of the first things. So, what is it that she did that made me think of the law? Yesterday I mentioned means and ends. You should. I want to link it to law, because what she is saying. What's your name? I forgot. Wagmi. Yeah. What she is implying, at least, is the law and the state are one package, and people and society are a separate package. Right? That's what she meant. That's why she said that this lady worked outside the law, means out of the framework of the law, not illegal. This is one part that the theoretical framework of yesterday that I can link to, that what is law? What is law? And therefore, what is the community? Yesterday I said ends and means. So I thought I'll use yesterday's video as an example to say what I meant, because some of you may not have really understood. Her end in the video was how to save these endangered birds. And those birds were really large. So it couldn't be put in a cage or something to protect in anyone's home. And she realized that the people in those villages were not interested in protecting the birds. They thought of them as bad omen to destruction of crop and spreading disease and symbol of death. Yeah. So she worked on understanding what were the social priorities of the communities. Engage herself in those priorities so that she gets integrated into the community. Build the relationship by which she can change or influence or reprioritize the priorities of the communities. These are all means. Once she decided on the end, that end was forgotten. Because it makes no difference whether you can, we might have all grand ideas, but it makes no practical difference unless we can figure out how to do it. Right? We might have all grand ideas. All of us dream of liberty and freedom. But it makes no difference unless we can figure out how. She gave a very good demonstration of how, without resorting to the law of the state. Right? Yeah, so please interrupt and let me know whether I'm working, you are coming along with me. Because these first few slides I had not even thought of. And therefore, the sense of community that was reconfigured reimagined, right? The community that was not interested in those birds at all suddenly became interested in those birds. So that means the community got reoriented, reimagined, not because somebody had a stick or the law said do it otherwise. That didn't happen. They all felt it within, right? It is that shared experience that bonded her to the communities which didn't begin by trusting her. And it is on the basis of those shared bonds, the shared values emerge. From those shared values, the primary aspect which is necessary in any such activity is trust. The whole market that we talk of, if it has to work, can only work on trust. There's nothing else. She created that trust. And once the trust was created, that goal became possible. Because it became the goal of the whole community. Right? Now, where does the law fit in? Because this whole exercise is actually how, the perhaps another one, because they're so new, it's not fit in my mind. Yeah. So yesterday I was talking of politics and practice of thinking. This is actually a expansion on what I thought then yesterday. And I hadn't thought of it till less than 24 hours ago. And I was writing it down while you guys were in the morning sessions. People, politics, and power. People you need because it's only people who think. Politics is this whole process that she undertook in her own village. That engaging with people is the essence of politics. To bring people together to get a shared goal and try to work together as a community. Any business that works and grows needs that culture within. People have to share. So they got the truth, of course, because that was a very narrow truth that the stocks which were thought of as irrelevant suddenly became very relevant. So that was the truth, but that was incidental. In the sense, in our case, that's incidental because most of us won't be engaging with that particular truth. But all of us have to engage with our versions of the truth. So it doesn't matter whether we want freedom, whether we want liberty, whether we want property, whether we want prosperity, whether we want markets. The question is, what is the process of getting to that point? To me, that video is a very good example, if you can imagine, of a practical demonstration on the ground with least amount of effort but a great deal of imagination of how to transform. Right? And that to me is, I would like to think, is the real essence of politics or the process, this political process. And it is far different from whenever you or any of us use the word politics, what does it strike in your mind? Forget this context. If you read or heard about politics, what would you have thought? Huh? Interest groups. And state and people and power. Exactly. Corruption. That's a consequence, yeah. Yeah. But
concentrated costs and disbursement.
Oh, that's corruption. That's the essence of corruption. Was there any of what you just said in this except people? Yeah. This is real politics. How to craft, reimagine an idea across a shared community so that you have a cohesiveness to take it forward. Okay, so I'm through with two of them. Now the law. This is probably the last slide I made from yesterday. Culture and law of culture, or culture of law. What she did I'm using that because I don't know to what extent that video made an impression on you. But as you can see, it made a huge impression on me. Not because of what she did in terms of a village and the stocks. I had no idea of the stocks nor of those villages. But how she did it. Yeah, I can't think of explaining it better. That's why I showed the video. And I'm trying to, just like yesterday, I tried to connect the dots with the other speakers. Today, I'm trying to connect the dot with myself. And therefore, I really need to thank Kumar for cajoling me to come to this thing so that I can go back knowing that I made a difference to my own thinking. Which is why, now if you tell me that I didn't explain anything, it won't bother me. Otherwise, I would have thought, that Kumar called me and I didn't add value to you. But now I know I added value to myself. Because I had watched that video 2 months ago. I had thought of many things about it, but not this. Yes.
So, can you come to the previous slide for a moment? So, one thing is, even yesterday and today, I do not understand what exactly, like, how are you defining the term truth exactly? Yeah, that is something.
Yeah, that's why the video. Forget the abstraction. The community didn't believe that the stocks are of any relevance, right? Right? By the end, that video is 15 minutes, but by the end of the few months and a few years, it has become clear to anyone who is following that issue that they have rethought their truth. That's truth. For the moment, in that context, truth is not what we believe it to be, an absolute permanence. That is what I said yesterday. A is a truth. Or 2 plus 2 equal to 4 is a truth. But that only works if you know the context. Without that context, it has no meaning. What are those two? Would any two mobile phones be considered 2 plus 2, 4? It may not. I might set my context that I want a Samsung mobile to be counted as part of the two. It's context. Truth, which is why those of you who read Rand and want to know about objective truth, what is an objective truth without the context? Because I have spent 40 years with Rand. What is that objective truth and what is A and A is A without knowing what is the A that you are first linking it to? Once you know that, so she knew the stocks were her goal. That was her truth. Stocks were, those birds were endangered in those areas. That is an information. She realized that is also a fact, that India has 2/3 of those stocks, about 1,800 out of 3,000 in the world. So those are informations and facts. What do you do with this? You transform the information and facts into a shared truth, so that as a company or as a community, you can work together to do something. This is the emergence of truth in a particular context. Her context was very clear, the video was very sharp, and what I'm trying to say is to try and make you realize that the truth is not something out there and we suddenly learn. Truth emerges, and it is continuously changing because our context is changing, our information is changing, our understanding is changing, the facts are changing. Okay? It's not easy. It's not easy. For those of you who are into Rand, it's surely not easy. I have struggled hard, and I know how some of my friends find it very difficult when I try to explain to them what is actually A is A. Because to them, A is either what John Galt says A to B, or what Ayn Rand says A to B. A is not what they say A to B. Because they never say this is this is their A. We have to come to that just like this lady got to the same truth, created that culture that led to that common truth. That whole process is politics. To arrive at a common truth so that you can act on it. Because without that truth, the villages would all have been acting in their own field. Some people would be killing the birds, some people would be not bothered or doing something else. Once they share the truth, they come together to work together. Okay, so this is, and while the process is politics, what gets ingrained is a culture. Every member of the community begins, because they have gone through that experience, begin to realize a practicing, living culture of engagement. And law emerges from that. Because it is these practices, customary practices, that at a later date turns into what the English would call customary law, which we don't have to wait for the English to call it. We know it all across India. Even today, virtually every district of India almost has its own system of measuring land. Why? In today's day and age, when Google can map the whole world, why are districts and the farmers using different measures to use the land? Because that's the custom, that's the practice. The same reason why, no matter the power of IT, they cannot change the QWERTY keyboard yet. The QWERTY keyboard that we use in the phones and computers might become redundant because a voice might take it over. Voice might replace. But for 120 years, no magician has been able to change a QWERTY keyboard with, there have been many attempts to rationalize, redesign the keyboard. It simply has not worked. From the days of manual computers to today's mobile smartphones, it's not worked. Because it became customary. People were familiar. That is culture. That is the power. And she created that culture, the first step to move to understand what law is. Because it is through these repeated practices that cultural practices transform into customary laws. And customary laws would get at some point integrated with the state and politics and power and become codified law. Yet Hayek, writing 50 years ago, would say that this is discrete, this is dispersed, it's not concentrated, this is all spread out. You cannot get this information at one go. And India's land law is a classic example. Not the laws, the measurement. Why a whole of India measures law differently. In the village that I stay in the mountain, we use a standard I had never heard of before we went there. And except, I think, parts of Uttarakhand and parts of Himachal, no one uses that standard. But it's still working. All purchase and sale happens by that standard. That's the power of custom. It has become that no law can force it, just as the QWERTY keyboard. It's part of the culture, it cannot be forced out. So what I want to get at is these two things. The culture and law are not synonyms, but one leads to the other. What is necessary is to retain this culture of law, which is what she showed in that video. That is a practice which retains a continuous practice of culture and therefore reinforce the law, reinforce that particular law in that setting. And why is it important? This is very important. This is critical to what I'm going to say next, and I'm going to shock myself also that I'll be saying it. This process is critical if we are to escape what is now a noose around the neck of each and every individual in this city, in this room, and elsewhere. The noose of law, the legalization of society that has become perhaps the biggest burden that all of us are carrying. And we don't even know it because we imagine that is rule of law. It is not. That's the distinction Wagmi instinctively made between state law and practices which became part of law, part of customary law. This culture of law is critical if we are to be able to save ourselves from the empire of law. It is very critical to understand that without this culture of law, there will be no defense when the state law comes in, moves in. Why? Because those villagers that you saw in the village in Assam, what defense do they have? They won't have the arms, and even if they pick up arms, how much arms they can pick up against the state? Nothing. Right? Nothing. So the only defense they have is this culture. And we can think of innumerable examples throughout India's history and around the world where that saved the day of law. The state could not impose it. Today, we have virtually equated law with state. Okay, so the next one. Architecture of law. You know, these 4 principles Kumar would know was embossed in my heart since mid-1980s. You know, that's how Parth and I came to know each other in the mid-1980s. You know, most of you were not born, right? Yeah. Ever since we came together because we shared these 4 principles. Is there anybody here in this room who thinks that these principles are not worth it? Which one?
I just think there's a lot of critique in them. The very concept of rule of law itself, I think when we say it, we just think of rule of law as rule of law. As long as the rule of law is there, everything else is going to be fine. But I think inherently the concept of rule of law and what it promises is quite problematic.
Yeah, so tell me if you have any issue with this side, this right-hand side of this slide. Well, probably it's too low. Yeah.
I think free market has its critique.
Why?
For example, based on some of the talks that I've attended over here, there seems to be a dichotomy between the government and the market, and government has its flaws, as we're discussing, but so does the market. By centering the idea of gain or profit, however we want to call it, I don't think all human interactions can be successful if we centralize gain as the deriving force. I think market has a role, but I don't think markets can do everything.
Okay, so we'll come to that. Yeah. I mean, that is a tangential point, but it's a good point. I will come to how I have begun to think of this. Mind you, if I want, I think Kumar, that's on the video. That's on YouTube. The last Baithak we did with, yeah. I actually went through one by one, acknowledging where I went wrong in all these years. One by one, this was embossed in my heart for 40 years. Then I began to realize there is a problem. And that problem relates to this architecture of law. Because this other side, the values and the communities. Yeah, I'm very bad at moving these things. Where's the pointer? The pointer doesn't come on this, I think.
I'll figure it.
Yeah. So the difference between, this was, like I said, these were my fundamental principles once I went on this journey with Parth. This was either assumed, taken as given, or completely ignored as, something historical that has happened and dusted and done. Today, I've completely reversed. And if you see that video that CCS did in their office, where Kumar, I, and Amit, we were discussing, that I pointed out that each of these points, probably I didn't reach the market point, but today I'm going to reach it. That why I think each of these is a problem. Because this is the foundation, like I said, the culture side of law, the values side of law, the culture, the values that emerge from the cultural practices of those communities. Without sustaining, nurturing this side, this becomes abstract ideals which can only be enforced by the power of the state. Yeah, it's not been an easy exercise for me. I mean, I have been shaken to the core that I'm saying this now, realizing how I um, might have completely misunderstood some of the fundamental tenets of what I wanted to do. Okay, why the law is important? Why to understand the law, the significance of law, the clarity in thinking about what is law, what is rule of law. So this one this I've been for, it's now quite a few years that I've been at it. Legalization of society. From birth to death, is there any aspect in our lives in modern society that is outside of the law as the state lays it down? Is there any aspect? Huh? Yeah, but even friendship, for instance, if there's a law that says that you want to marry somebody who's outside your identity, your caste or religion, and it's prohibited, and we are heading into that. What would stop if they can do it for marriage? What would stop saying that two people should not meet? For instance, they can easily say, the law can easily say that boys and girls should not meet. What happens to that friendship? Yeah. Yeah.
I'd say also governs the life beyond death, be it the death certificate, as long as that's not there.
Yeah, forget beyond, at least till death. The death certificate is the end of death, but that is at least up to that point, once I am dead, it doesn't matter what happens to my property, etc. But the death certificate, without the death certificate, if you are in a city, you'll have a hard time getting your body cremated or buried, which whatever. Yeah, without a death certificate, they'll not touch it. In a village, and I hope I die in a village, because in a village, all that can be bypassed because the reach of the state is that much limited. Otherwise, all of us are slaves of the law that we believe is rule of law. It is a mockery of the idea of rule of law. It has happened not because the state has forced it on us. It has happened because we, on our own volition, have failed to imagine and conceptualize and think what is law. That's why that video is so significant. If you want to see it, search it on Google. You'll find on YouTube. You'll find it. See it once, see it twice, see it 3 times. You'll find meaning, and to me, your own credential to yourself will depend on how much meaning you can extract. Which is why I said, no, to me, I cannot tell how much you have understood in the last 2 days of my rants, right? I can't say that. I'm not going to hold any exams, nor am I interested in that. But I know that at the end of these 4 days, I am carrying a different understanding of law than I began with. So I have profited. We believe yesterday Tom was saying, thank you. Yeah, I was in that room, but I heard. Didn't he? That it's a thank you moment. Market is a win-win because free trade is a win-win. To me, this is a win-win. I can't lose because I have already made my connection. Have you? Because you will gain when you make your own connection, just like I am trying to make mine own. So from every aspect, but life to death, we have been in this. And the ultimate one, this is why my question yesterday on immigration. The state is defining citizens, which is a very modern phenomenon. Till the 1920s, there was no passport restriction till the First World War. People could just move around anywhere. There was no Indian boundary being protected by somebody else. Emperors came and went, but no one protected the boundaries. The boundaries were assumed that, okay, that is that side, that is this side, but you are free to go and trade. And the kings and the queens and the emperors, they were primarily interested in that if there is any meaningful economic transaction, can we get some taxes? Rest is you're free. Much of Europe was like that. Much of the continents were like that. And today, we are so ingrained that hardly any of you would say that let's open India's border. I asked you that question, didn't I? Well, what are we afraid of? Because we cannot think of opening our international borders, we cannot think of opening our state borders, and because we cannot think of opening our state borders, we cannot think of opening our minds. We cannot even have friendship. Friendship requires opening your mind and your heart. Once you draw the boundary. And this is just a 100-year phenomenon. Today we are so ingrained. We can't think of a world without citizens. We all try to fight to get our voter ID and our citizens ID or the Aadhaar number. Because that's our identity. Is that, if Aadhaar is our identity, what would be about our friendship? Will we be checking, do you have an Aadhaar? Are you an Indian citizen? How do I know? Is creeping not just here, across the world in the freest of the free countries, because we have lost to imagine what is law. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really need some warm water. Thanks. The empire of law. Yeah.
Can we not think of law as codified social norms?
The problem is you can. Of course you can. Problem is with the codification itself. The moment we put things in word, the words I am using has a particular meaning for me, words you are using has a particular meaning for you. Once you codify, you try to rigidify it. Once you rigidify, the interpretations will vary. The dictionaries and the lawyers will have a field day, exactly as they're having. I'll come to that too.
It becomes static, right?
No, it becomes rigid, not static. It becomes rigid, and because it is so rigid, all of us are investing or spending money on creative lawyers who can reimagine and go around and bend those rigidities. Yeah.
There is an argument that's usually made that society-based, trust-based transactions in the society often is limited to that society until and unless there's a contract enforcement mechanism such as a court and so on. So traditionally, I think there are societies in South Italy, South America who have perished, who have not really prospered, as opposed to their counterparts who have had rigid contract enforcement mechanisms. So,
yeah, we'll come to that. I'll come to that. I'm keeping it for the final death knell of my thinking. I'm actually working towards it. I'm trying to break through my own barriers. Because I cannot break through Indian barrier to go to Bangladesh or to Sri Lanka. That perhaps in the next birth. But the least I can do is break my own barrier. That's why I kept that. We didn't have the time that day at CCS when I actually intended to go point by point why I'm rejecting or understanding the limitations of the 4 principles that are still in my heart. I'll come to that. So please remember and there is a slide where I talk somewhat more, not really in terms of contract, but yeah, I understand what you're saying. So empire of law. It began with taxes and trade, right? An emperor or a ruler would like some money, and the best way is to extract it from the people who are there, farmers or landlords or whatever. So you have 2 ways fundamentally. One is you have taxes at the border, collect whatever on trade, and on production. So farmers on the field, they have to pay 10%, 20%, 30%, whatever the king, in whichever way. Or it could be in kind. That you give me a month's worth of labor free, so that I won't bother you for the rest of the year. Some contract or extra law or rule or practice of that kind. Then the issue of currency, the money, which you had more discussion in the morning session, Vipin's. Currency as a monopoly tender. Currency was not a monopoly tender once upon a time. Today we cannot think of a currency but being a monopoly tender. And some of my friends who are into the digital world are thinking of trying to break out of it. I have grave reservation whether these digital currencies will survive the reach of the state. It's not possible in today's world. Particularly given what has happened in the last 5 years. The biggest of the companies in the world surrendered to the state in the freest of the countries that we imagine? Can you name it? Can you name the company? Can you name the country? Oh, that's been 40 years. Yeah. Freest of the countries and the largest of the companies. Yeah. Imagine all of you recognize them. Yeah. And which countries are there? US. The Twitter and Facebook collaborated with the state to control and stifle information in a manner that was unthinkable. No one would be surprised if Alibaba and the Chinese did it. That was the norm there. That is the extent to which we have handicapped our thinking. That is the price of freedom. That is the burden of law. It's not that there's a person holding a gun against my head or our head. We ourselves have tied ourselves up because we are unable to think, unable to imagine. That lady in Assam imagined fantastically. She didn't get deterred because the community did not sign up for her cause. She entered the community, became a part, and the community changed. Another truth emerged, and there was a consensus that the birds have to be saved. Okay, let me deal with answer some of your questions here itself in this side, Empire of Law. There's a very interesting book which came out, I think, in 2019 or 17 or something, by I think a Yale professor, Katharina Pistor, Pistor, The Code of Capital. It traces how in the modern world the code of capital works, that is code meaning what you said, codified law, how it works. But I trace it back to history. In fact, I was just asking somebody who's here with Chris's friend Shamugatam. Legal person. How many of you are studying law here? I saw you studying law. You studied, done. You studied. You also studied? Okay. What is a legal person? Tell me. I'm an engineer. I have never studied law as law. I'm more interested in the philosophy of law. What is a legal person? Made by law. Made by law. What was the first such person? When was that? Yeah, 1600, 1500, whatever. Yeah, East India is one, Dutch Indies is another. Long before that, 1,000 years before that, when law was barely codified, but customs were getting placed in because the rulers were establishing themselves and therefore they were co-opting and adopting the customs. Chinese, an old friend of mine who's Chinese but now settled in US, we were having this discussion last weekend. He pointed out from his research that the first legal person that one can find is a Japanese monastery. And no surprise, the monasteries and temples, as we know in India, have been traditional centers where people donated. So once you donate, what do? If it's gold, you can keep it under your, create a room and keep it there. If it's land or if it's money, cash, you buy something. You buy land or you are gifted land. The kings and the queens and the landlords would often gift land to local temples because it's part of their community. What happens? The temples become very rich. And once you become very rich, what happens? What happens? No, you can save and invest, but to save and invest, what do you need? Exactly, you need protection. And who will protect? The king and the state. You see the nexus, the collusion between political power and private power, political power and private profit. These temples needed protection because without the protection of the state, what happens to their gold and how will they defend their land? That is in 500 AD or thereabouts.
Why are they forfeiting that
Where? They're not.
There's a whole movement going on within these Gurus. We do not need state people to.
Because they now want absolute rule of themselves. They want to turn public wealth into private wealth, which is what is the classic definition of cronyism. That you use the law to turn what was, a temple is a public community property, which is why people are donating. Because the heads of those temples, even Shankaracharyas, will die. Somebody else will succeed. If there is no law, then Shankaracharya and his family will say that we are going to take all the wealth. So you needed the law to ensure that there is a succession, and the state in turn says that I'll protect. That's the contract. This collusion between political power and private profit has been as old as a few thousand years. So what some of us might crib today as cronyism is nothing new. It's in the culture, it's in the thinking. This is again why you see the difference. The formal sectors of the economy or transactions cannot happen without the protection of the law. But in countries like India, if any one of us open our eyes, we'll know and see that half of India operates informally. I live in a village where no one, in fact, I have been to villages. He lives in Bastar, in Chhattisgarh. Some years ago, I had been to one of the villages in Chhattisgarh. It's a real backward tribal village. I was shocked and amazed that how these people could sign on a piece of paper, even with a thumb print, saying that I am transferring this piece of land which my family had been cultivating to somebody else, and the village accepts that yes, this transaction is valid, we have accepted, so now this other guy will be operating at a cost of whatever, 20,000, 5,000 or whatever it was. You didn't need a stamp paper. You didn't need a protection of the law. The contract was cultural. Yeah, it was cultural. That is, the community recognizes that this piece of paper he voluntarily signed at this price to you. And this community recognizes that this piece of land is now you will be farming. That is only necessary if the community, all of you, 30 people here, don't recognize him or don't know him. But both of you belong to the same area. And in villages of Chhattisgarh or Orissa or Bihar, hundreds and thousands of people move out every season. Yeah?
I think that's part of the problem, right? Our inability to think that until and unless law is part of that communication itself is valid. Because we
Correct.
overlap law with legitimacy.
Correct. And legitimacy stamped with a symbol of the state. And I'll come to, yeah.
What if tomorrow the community stops liking me and decides?
Exactly what that lady did. The Assam lady, the lady from Assam. Yeah. She did it. She showed it. That how you nurture a community. Why is it that, I know this is something last 4 or 5 years I'm really appalled and surprised. Why is it that those of us who support and think that we believe in free market always expect a free ride? We expect a ride on the shoulder of the state, but think it is legitimate, that we have somehow deserved it. I'll give you an example. Forget the village in Bastar, Chhattisgarh. In Delhi, I don't know how many of you even observe, but go out and observe, yeah?
But my earlier question still remains.
Which one?
If the community decides to disown me,
They can.
then I lose.
Of
right
course
to
you
my
do.
life.
Of course you do. Which is why you have to invest in the community so that the community does not come to that stage.
That's majoritarianism.
No. It's not majoritarianism. Did she do any voting to get?
She didn't, but if I went to Bastar and tried to buy land as an outsider, tomorrow they decide, they don't like me. That is majoritarianism.
No, it's not majoritarianism. It is power.
It power.
It's
Here
power.
Yes.
It's power. That's what I said, didn't I say in that previous slide? Uh, this last line. This last line I put in last night. Because the only defense we can count on is our relationship and our commitment and our investment in the community where we are. If we are going to rely on the state, think of what will happen. He is in Bastar. He relies on the state. And the state then signs the piece of land to the cronies to develop coal mines. What happened to his own land? He has no escape at all because he's under the law. Freedom is not a free ride. I've learnt it the hard way. Freedom cannot, if we really believe in freedom, we cannot expect a free ride. We have to invest. We have to invest in the community where we live so that we can survive. Yeah, but quickly, I think, how's the time? You must have a clock here. I mean, okay. Yeah, because I have a few more slides.
I mean, one thing is that, you said about, okay, what if the community disowns me? But I guess there is a broader chance of state also sort of disowning me.
And then we have no recourse.
And then you have no recourse
Yeah.
at all.
But okay.
There's a communist revolution.
Let's say I decide to move to the US, don't show up for 30 years. Will I lose my land?
You won't. If the community is there, you won't. I have seen it in our villages. In our villages, most of us don't need boundaries. Most of us don't need to put in fences to have boundaries. Why? Why do we have such large walls in Delhi? Why do we, just think of it. Why do we need these large walls in these colonies where very few people live and some of the richest and powerful people live? Why do they put up boundaries? Because they don't have a sense of a community. In the village where I am living, pieces of land have been unbounded for decades.
But that doesn't scale, right? Like 20 million people cannot have
Who
that.
wants to scale?
But if you want to live in Delhi, you live in a 20 million.
It is because we have not invested in the community. Any one of our houses can get demolished and confiscated and taken over, and we have no say except 30 years in a court of law. In contrast, I'll give you, that's what I was coming to, I'll give you another example. Just a minute. I'll give you another example. I'll give you another example from Delhi. Because I saw it myself, I'm seeing it now almost every day. All of us know, those who know Delhi or have lived in Delhi, that in the residential areas, we typically have 2-3 categories of people who operate their business on the footpath. The cobbler, the ironing woman of the families, and some such regular tea stalls or a barber shop or somebody who set up a table and a chair and running it on the footpath, right? Right? Sabji walas are probably a little more mobile at times, but yeah, even sabji walas or fruit walas, where they set up a table and they are there all the time. I mean, every day. Have you noticed how on Sunday, at a certain time or periods of the year, the person who was the cobbler in your neighborhood changes and becomes somebody else, but the business may still continue? Have you, so many of you are interested in policy and economics. Yeah, have you noticed? Because stay on this, because I'm going to,
No, we've noticed.
yeah. So stay on this, because it's like yesterday. I'm going to force you. You may be uncomfortable. I may be uncomfortable forcing you, but we must force ourselves. This person changes typically. I am from Chhattisgarh. I am here for 6 months a year. I have set up this business where I have a fixed clientele who every day or every week comes to me for repairing my shoe or polishing my shoe or whatever. But at the end of the 6 months, I have to go back to the village because there will be some land there, or the village during the growing season, the monsoon, needs more labor. So I'll have a more regular income in the village than here, because here it is regular but perhaps at a lower level, and in the monsoon, the number of people coming to these kind of services at the cobbler's place is lower because everybody's shoes get dirty every day. So we won't go there every day. So I give it to Adnan. He is from my neighboring village or from my same caste or whatever. But he doesn't go back because he doesn't have any gainful employment in the village around that time. We don't even sign a piece of paper. We just tell him that yes, you are my bhaichara. You will come back. I'll come back 6 months later. Till that time, you develop. You keep the business running. Why does he need it? Because he needs the customers. Who needs the protection that there will be somebody who will be repairing or polishing my shoe. He doesn't want to lose that business. So the business is cultivated, and the transaction happens completely informally. This is routine. Stay on this question. Otherwise, no.
Yeah, same question.
Yeah.
But this also reminds me of, let's say, Bombay in the 90s, where you would have all these small gangs trying to terrorize the street vendors, right? What if some gunman comes and tries to vacate Adnan and be like, from tomorrow you're not allowed to sit here?
Yeah. Good question.
Then do we need the state?
No, we don't. I mean, if we need this, if we use the state, you can use the state. The first question is, will you be able to? And what will happen when that noose tightens on your neck next time round? So to me, that is the question. We'll come to that. We'll come to that. We don't. We don't. Because the security is not. That is exactly the ground on which all the boundaries have been set up under the umbrella of the state laws to stop us from thinking. Yeah. On the same point. On the same point.
On the larger point, basically.
What's the point?
That the setting that you have, when obviously Gandhi also, Gandhi also used this to talk about village society. The problem, and the core of this problem is that this trust is limited to that village or that caste in many cases. So Adnan and you are from the same village. That's why you are able to. There is some level of high trust that is already established because of. Now, in the age of globalization, we're not living in a village, and we are moving from one place to another.
Okay. Cut the long story short because we'll run out of time. But I'll answer it immediately. 2000 years ago, did India have any emperor that ruled or controlled the borders? Not really. 2000 years ago, the Malabar coast in Kerala was trading with ancient Greece and Rome. How did it happen? Were they of the same caste? Were they of the same language? Were they had the same biradari, same jati, same gotra? They built the trust. Trust is cultivated. That lady in Assam showed how trust is cultivated. Trust needs to be cultivated on a daily basis. Huh? Of course. The other one is even more dangerous because there's a gun. And I'll just come to that because I think I'm. Yeah, so the last point here is this culture of cronyism. If we complain today, we should remember that this is not a bug. It's a feature of the law that we have created, the rule of law as an institution. And I am more surprised than any of you are that I am drawing this conclusion. Yeah, because I am forcing myself to recognize how deep the hole I had dug because I was unable to think. I am not rejecting any of the principles of individual rights, free market or limited government. I am not rejecting them at all. I am trying to reimagine so that we can think differently so that we can make it happen. That's why that Assam story is so relevant. She thought of an idea and made it happen. Not by using the state or the stick, but by cultivating the community, cultivating a culture, cultivating that trust. Whether she'll succeed 50 years down the road, who knows? Whether I'll live tomorrow, who knows? I'm driving back, I have 25 kilometers to drive, I'm tired, anything can happen to me. And that's true for any of us. I said yesterday, we don't focus on the ends because ends are always in the future. You know your end, that's okay. She knew that stocks needed to be saved. Focus on the means, that's today. Okay, so I think I'm nearly to the end. Since Gandhi, I can't forget Gandhi because 10 years I'm immersed into it. And what he wrote a book, I mean, part of Hind Swaraj in 1909, but they compiled it into a book why Gandhi was so critical of law and lawyers. Law meaning the institution of law. Why? And he was a successful barrister, a very successful barrister in South Africa for 20 years. And one evidence of success, which I discovered very recently, success in my terms, it is a success. You know how many books he brought back from South Africa on a ship with his family when he returned in 1914? We think that he was not a well-read man and he was a sadhu or an ascetic. How many books he could have brought back on a ship from South Africa in 1914 when he packed his bags and came back to India? 1914. I mean, 1915 he was in January, yeah, because at the end of the year, yeah. Yeah, exactly, 10,000. How many of us shift homes carrying 10,000? Because in those days you needed to physically shift, right? There was no digital books. How many of us who may have digital books in our computers can track back books that we acquired 5-10 years ago? 10,000 books that he had acquired and purchased over the years, and some people may have donated also, he got back. That was the basis by which he set up the first public library in Ahmedabad. Public meaning truly public, not state, where people could gather. That subsequently went on to become part of the Gujarat Vidyapith in Ahmedabad. This man, who was a successful barrister, 21 years as an expat in South Africa, came to believe that every action of the state is a manifestation of violence because it's backed by the force of law. I can't think of another more fundamental criticism of this idea of rule of law by the state, of the state for the state. He said it in the 1920s, that this is becoming an absurdity, which is why we are not surprised. In fact, we even welcome that let the state come in and hope it will protect us, even when we know it will not protect us when it comes to a crunch. That is our lack of imagination. I was amazed. That's why an article I wrote on the 150th anniversary of Gandhi, I said that he was perhaps, in my view, the last of the classical liberals and the first of the libertarians. And completely different from the libertarians and the individualists like us of today. Because he built the community, he built the identity of a nation. He reimagined what politics is and translated it at a scale that lady in Assam has not even conceived yet. Yesterday I showed you Champaran. That's how the common man of India began to notice that there is something called Gandhi. Because he spent those months struggling with the villagers, building that community, building that trust, taking them along and getting a result exactly like this lady did. That is why we need to be extremely cautious about what we mean by law. Law is morality. Morality has to be voluntary if it has to remain moral. What is morality with a gun in my hand? That's not morality. Morality has to be voluntary, which means it has to be constantly practiced and investment made to create a culture that practices it. The law will follow. Otherwise, we are handing it ourselves over to the empire of this law. And we will be squeezed. That's why cronyism today is not a bug. It's not an aberration. It's not a miscarriage of law. It is the product of the law that we imagine today. let me end with this, then we can have more discussion. So, because I've cut many of you off. Two last points. Uh, just imagine we have, I mean, every country has, and we have two laws on various laws on property, right? Various kinds of property. No, not just land, various kinds of property. 66% of India's court cases are property disputes. So, what has all this architecture done? It has proliferated the disputes, and many of you in the last 4 days heard about incentives. What's the incentive for the lawyer and the law institutions to resolve the disputes? What's the incentive? Any one of you who have ever had any encounter with a court of law, you will know that the lawyer typically earns by the number of appearances he makes in the court. Which means the more the appearances, the more the number of adjournments, the greater the delay, greater the incentive for the lawyers on both sides. And so for the courts. It's not a coincidence that we have 4 crores, 40 lakh cases pending. What has the proliferation of the law of the state done? It has trapped us. It's like a quagmire. You know quicksand? You know quicksand? That kind of sucks you in? Yeah, it's a quagmire. Gandhi recognized it 100 years ago, that we are heading into a trouble. And both these are direct continuation, and the reason why he supported informal institutions, the culture of law. We need to reclaim law for its moral roots rather than the gun that is backing what we today believe to be law. Okay, let me end. This was my last slide. Yeah. So this is a summary. So, I mean, I'm not going to go through this. I think I probably, yeah, I have gone through all of that. Yeah, we can now discuss.
Okay. First thing is,
But keep it
I think
narrow,
it's a
yeah.
point, Just on the lawyer fees bit, I think the problem is on the regulation that does not let that part get flourished, because there is a prohibition on charging success fee. If you did charge a success fee, you could solve these problems of hearing based. So that's a separate point.
Yeah, then the question would be, and we don't have to answer it, but the question would obviously be, no, why that doesn't happen? Yeah.
Okay. On the community.
She has another one.
Sorry, community and shared values bit, right? So one thing is, like he also mentioned, if it's going a community-based value system has a way to sort of hamper individual rights, because you can get ostracized by the community if you stand for something against what the community stands for. Second, I don't fully agree with the fact that there is no violence when it's a community-based value. Sati was completely okay and voluntary for most part of things. Unless a law came in to prohibit it, people would have been in female infanticide, another example. So, just...
Yeah. On the last 2 points on the exceptions, I showed you just the previous slide. Just on the laws of property, if we have 66% of the court cases on property, it has not been resolved even by the law. Just because we have prohibited, gender tests, pre-birth, prenatal gender tests, and we have a law that says female infanticide, I can narrate to you stories I have heard myself from doctors and people who work in the community, how it is prevalent even now. The law has no relevance. When it's culture, the law has no relevance, because I don't want to share in this audience perhaps the stories that I heard from people regarding infanticide and death of the elderly in communities. That's the cost. Of course, that's the cost. But that can only be dealt with, we have 2 options. Very simple. Whether the law of the state, which you already have, and it has not worked, and figure out what you can do on the ground. There's no other option. It should, ideally, only if the moral roots of the law is revived. It will not if it is only because of the gun. Yeah. I hope short, because
Okay,
I think, yeah.
very short
Yeah.
thoughts. Just 2 movies I
2 movies.
2 movies.
Okay, I'm not big
a
movie
lot
buff,
of-
but yeah.
We watched like Court. And
Which one?
Court.
It's a
Court.
serial.
No, it's a movie by
Okay.
Chaitanya
Hmm.
Tama.
Hmm.
That's one.
I think I've heard about it. Yeah.
The other one is Bandit Queen,
Hmm.
Phulam Devi. And I just feel like what we're discussing right now, it's difficult for us to imagine a solution, but we're thinking about the solution later. We're trying to critique it first only. The kind of systems and the institutions that we have in front of us right now, they were not made like this. They're a product of history. No one has all the answers in the first sitting, but it's our responsibility as a community to decide how to go ahead. Similarly, the question about sati. No one is saying the community is perfect, but community will also have certain values. Again, it's upon us as a community about what kind of values do we want to move forward with.
I'll give you one example on this because just last night I was talking to somebody with a friend, tangentially on that. Isn't it curious that most of us are Indians here except John? So I'll fill you in if you need to. Isn't it curious that a society, civilization such as India's, has had over centuries in virtually every part of India social reformers from virtually every caste who tried to instigate change in their areas and across religion. Yeah, Muslims had it, Hindus had it, Jains had it. I mean, virtually everyone. It was part of the culture that there would be people who would come up who were not leaders of the mutts and temples or mosques, whom today generally is referred to as sons. I mean, people who are considered to be wise men today on hindsight, but they did enormously. Virtually every part. There is no part of India that is immune from it. Were they perfect? No. Did they solve all the problems? No. But they showed repeatedly these people came up seeking solution to the problem that they faced in their community, quite like this lady in Assam. In the last 100 years, whom can you name? I'm keeping Gandhi out of it because Gandhi was a political leader. He was not a Sant Mahatma in that sense. Anti-corruption created what we know it has created. So let's not get into that. Yeah. Not one. Not a coincidence. Because why is it not a coincidence? Because we as a society, as a community, as people have outsourced our freedom to the power of the state. And therefore, the state has taken over all these roles of doing social good. Society has lost the roots from which people came up to do these reforms. It's a huge tragedy for a society such as ours that has such a rich history. I can't say this about outside of the subcontinent for the reason that I don't know enough about, say, in Middle East or Egypt or Europe or something. But India in the greatest sense, as a civilization that is India, the subcontinent as we know it. Why has it happened? People did it repeatedly. Whether it is Bengal or whether it's Maharashtra or whether it is Gujarat, repeatedly reformers came up, trying to figure out what's wrong and deal with a specific problem. You know what our problem is? And probably we should end here. I think our problem is we are always looking for that silver bullet. We are looking for somebody who will do this for us, a free ride. And to me, that has been one of my biggest takeaways of these last 4 days here. That we who believe in freedom and free market, or think we believe, we potentially are one of the biggest free riders, riding on the shoulder, on the powers of the worst form of or the enemy of freedom, that is the gun of the state. Our first reaction is, why not a law? Why not the state? Not our community, because we think community is not worth it. And we are paying the price. And not just us. This is now very global. The state has legitimized itself across the world. And in the name of law. And we look at law, which is why we cannot protest cronyism. because it all happens under the law, firstly. Secondly, we all look at the law as an instrument of power, and we expect to hope to benefit tweaking this piece of law somewhere. The lawyers are all doing it. So, exactly the reason why such a simple thing that you suggest can never get done. And I'm not a lawyer. We cannot outsource morality, which means we cannot outsource our values. Values can only be cultivated among people, in communities, wherever we are, in your business, in your mohalla, in your biradari, whatever the community is, everywhere. It's our responsibility, otherwise we are a free rider. I too am part of it. Any other? Sorry, I'm cutting across because it's 7 minutes left. Yeah.
I agree with the community-based thing. I think when we are working in the field of judicial reforms, and most of the time we go with an idea as opposed to the idea coming from them. It's been working quite well, so completely resonate with that. But given the current state of affairs, just taking India into consideration, right? We did a lot of CAA, most of us joined protests, Jallikattu, most of us joined protests. But we also see on the other spectrum of things where Veerdas, who's a comedian, was in fact
Veerdas, yeah, I know.
arrested for speaking against.
Yeah. He's not the only one. I mean, there have been endless.
I gave
Yeah.
that example because it's comedy, right?
Yeah.
You could punish something as
No, it's precisely these what do they call them? Stand-up comedians who are been at the brunt, and it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that the totalitarian regimes typically throughout the last 100-150 years have been against satire. I mean, Soviet Union was a classic example that the satire had to be hidden because strong men cannot tolerate laughing, particularly if the laughter is aimed at them. Yeah, neither can we. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to finish my question.
Okay, you still have one?
No, just for
Another
all
comment.
of us to
Yeah.
think, right? We all know everyone's scared also to bring about reforms. Like you said, who is the one person we can all think of, right? So what are your thoughts on us being the next sort of community to get there, given the current state of affairs in the country?
I can only say that plug in to the community. Try to figure out just exactly, which is why that video to me came as such a shocker. Not because I didn't know whatever she was doing, but because it was a concrete, tangible demonstration. And I'll give you one instance of my own experience. Kumar knows it. I didn't want to break my own head more further. I had been involved in one such community thing, which is on the question of land rights for the tribal people, lands that were not documented. So we had technology, we had friends who were completely committed to getting it done, and they're still working on it. I spent 5 years, 6 years with them, and which is why I went to Bastar and saw how this kind of transactions were taking place in full trust, and no complaints that this has happened, because it happened in public. I realized exactly what I'm saying today. What happens when you document your land? Just think, we are a community, we are a village, or we are in the Safdarjung enclave. Each piece of this wood, say, is a piece of land, right? Imagine. Each piece in this community, like in any community, everyone would know who is farming, who is housing, who is staying, who has rented, whatever, right? The disputes will be very little. The primary dispute that would happen is an age-old one. Can you think of the earliest property disputes that ever happened in India, at least in terms of our acknowledgement? Yeah, and where did it happen? Mahabharata and Ramayana. Ramayana and Mahabharata, epics that go back 1,000 or 2,000 years, are starting points of, or a visible manifestation of the scale and the enormity of the conflict that might emerge. Not because people didn't know who owned what. They knew precisely who owned what. Which is why, like yesterday when I asked, somebody said that what did Duryodhana say when the last negotiations have started? that I will not give a pinhead worth of soil to the Pandavas without a war. I said it yesterday. They knew exactly. Pandavas were only asking for 5 villages, not half the kingdom. Disputes are typically within people who know where the boundaries are. So why do we need to document? Community knew. We as outsiders don't. And once we get to know, because we have written free ride on the state for having documented all the lands of the country, what we do, we become cronies, so that we approach the state and say, parcel this land off to me, I'll give you this share, and this will be ours. Private power, private profit, and political power under the ambit of law is our curse of the day. Yeah. I'm being very rude and harsh, but yeah, to myself first. I'm shocked that I'm saying it, particularly now that Parth is back here, because I told them that we know each other from the 1980s, mid-1980s, 86, 87 or 84, 6. Yeah. And we came together on Ayn Rand, on individual rights, free market, rule of law, limited government. Exactly? Yeah. I'm glad you didn't hear it, because you would have got a heart attack or I would have got a heart attack. Yeah.
Beyond that.
Yeah. See, he already got a shock. Yeah, John.
How would common law and civil law fit this framework?
Common law would fit very well because it's evolutionary from the bottom, which is why the tendency is, even in common law countries, in the heart of the common law countries, to codify and start the process of creating new problems which will never get solved. So the evolutionary approach takes time. It takes investment in something that we don't want to, which is invest in the community. Because we don't look at ourselves as part of the community. That's our problem. We look at ourselves as independent, self-sufficient, self-reliant, whatever, and hope to have a free ride on the power of the state. Because we think, why do we need anybody else? When we think we don't need anybody else but the state, then the crony, I can take the state and have everybody else under me. Which is why codification is useful only if the moral roots of the laws are retained. And moral roots of the law can only be retained if they are practiced as a living culture. Not just as in law books or in courtrooms. Gandhi's critique, any one of you who is interested in this, you should, because I have been rethinking, like Parth and Kumar knows, read, particularly because I spoke today on law, read that small booklet that they have compiled on Gandhi on law and lawyers. And he pointed out this incentive issue 100 years ago, that here today we talk of market incentives or disincentives or distortions. That why lawyers are caught in a trap, and the way the institution of the courts are getting set up, it will only fuel disputes, exactly as it has happened over the last 100 years. Yeah.
So our community is a very diverse community, right? So how will community
begin wherever you can? You don't, we think, this is another of our problem. We think we have grand ideas, we can change the world. We can't change our neighborhood. Just look at this colony. No one in this colony is unaware of whose land begins where and whose property begins where. But they have 10 feet walls. Because they don't see each other. So you need the walls. And then walls are not sufficient, you need the guards. And then the guards are not sufficient, you need the night dogs. Every intervention of this kind that we make undermines the community that could have been.